All right, today I want to talk about living an unsustainable life. Most people calibrate their energy for endurance. And the goal for most people is to build a system, build a life where you can find a repeatable pace, something that moves my life forward that I can do every day. I avoid burnout and I do just enough that nothing breaks in my life. And this is how you build the system of what you spend your time doing, how you invest your energy. And the idea is that stability produces growth, and that sustainability is what protects you from regret. Because we look at people with a lot of chaos in their lives and a lot of unsustainable things in their lives, and we think this person is a mess. And very often that's true. Very often people with no stability live very messy lives, full of chaos, and that are undesirable, that nobody would want to inhabit. But the fallacy is that is we make this stability fallacy. We make a correlation fallacy where we say people with lives who are undesirable are living lives that are full of chaos. Therefore, I will live a life of order, and this will bring me a desirable life. That is the fallacy. That is this trick that we play on ourselves where we say, this is a feature of something I don't want, so I'm going to have the opposite feature define, characterize my life. And that assumption is wrong. That assumption is wrong, and it's at the root of a lot of advice that you're going to get in your life. You ever try to do anything meaningful? Because a life designed around stability tends to preserve the current structure of your life. So that might be fine if the current structure is desirable. But for most people, trying to change something fundamental, sustainability becomes a method of deferral. Sustainability rewards what can be maintained, not what must be transformed. And it actually resists transformation. The problem is that growth is a transformational process. So in seeking stability to avoid undesirable life, we actually achieve a life that is less than desirable if we want to grow, and if we have goals, and if we have any ambition at all. And what happens is people say, well, we don't want that, obviously. But what they'll do, on the other hand, is if they see you living a life that's unsustainable, they'll think you're going in a backwards direction. Here's the problem. You have to think of it less as a spectrum where you've got chaos on the undesirable side and order on the other on the desirable side. So chaos being undesirable, order being desirable. And think of it rather as a balancing act where you have order in the middle and it's setting the fulcrum of your personal, emotional, spiritual equilibrium. And on each side, you do have some chaos, right? I don't know if you guys can hear this, but there is a fire truck right outside my window, which is awesome. But what I want to do is I want to make this case for taking on more than you can handle, for decoupling this association we have between chaos and undesirability, and between disorder and undesirability, and to understand that sometimes to grow and to push the line up in your life and to achieve the kind of growth where you actually level up in a significant or meaningful or demarcatable way is you have to rely to a degree on chaos. Now, if your life is full of chaos, and my life's been there, and no order to the point where you have nothing sustainable, then you don't have a foundation upon which to introduce chaos. You just have an undesirable life. But if you have a life that is somewhat desirable and somewhat ordered and somewhat pleasing and basically systematized and within your control, but you feel stuck or plateaued, this is where chaos comes in and we say, okay, I'm doing something that is something I could theoretically repeat every day. I could theoretically repeat this day every day for the rest of my life. And I guess if I did that, I might be okay at the end. But do you want that? Is that truly desirable? The answer for most people is probably not. So I want to make the case for taking on more than you can handle for a season of committing to something completely unsustainable. Not as a recklessness, but as a strategy for structural insight, and for achievement. Because overload, when used deliberately, forces decisions you would otherwise delay. It clarifies priorities you didn't know were negotiable, and it reveals which ambitions were worth designing around. It's not really meant to be permanent. That's the whole point of it being unsustainable. Maybe it is unsustainable. That doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. It's meant to break what doesn't work and surface what might. If you're a runner, this is sprint work. This is speed training, right? You're speed training your life. So, why does unsustainability actually work as a catalyst for achievement and for achieving a desirable life? And why should it be uncoupled from this concept of undesirability? So, when you accept more responsibilities, and I know what you're thinking, and we'll get there. What about burnout, right? And I think that burnout is like a massively overused term, and I think that it's applied to situations that are not burnout. Pretty much anything in life. If we're working hard and then anything bad happens, we're like burnout, but it's not. So we'll get to that in a minute. But when you accept more responsibilities, and more projects, and more constraints than you can cleanly manage, then your existing system actually collapses under the weight of those obligations. And that collapse is not evidence of failure. It is information. It forces you to revise in real time, to cut, to sequence, to automate, because there's no other option. And most people think that you should optimize first, then grow. But the reality is often the reverse. You don't often have the time to catch your breath, devote what? A full hour, day, weekend to this optimization. And if you even get that much free time, are you really going to use it for that? No. So you grow until your system fails. And then you use that failure to design something that wasn't available to you at that lower level of demand. So this is what, if you know this channel, you know I like to draw on historical concepts. So this is what William James, amazing, wonderful, beautiful William James, refers to in The Moral Equivalent of War, which he wrote in 1910. And James refers to this concept of discipline through overload. Discipline through overload is the concept that real character is not developed by comfort, but by choosing to endure something that requires resourcefulness and sustained reorientation under duress. Overload, as we're talking about it, is not moral heroism. It is the field in which moral structure becomes testable. And we say, okay, can I test my character? Can I test my capabilities? Can I set a new ceiling on my heart rate here, on my effort here, so that I can create new benchmarks for myself in terms of what I should be expecting from myself, right? Because every day I wake up and I expect a certain level of performance from myself. And the question is, could I be expecting more? If I were expecting more, would I be asking too much from myself? Or should I be expecting something different? So when you say, okay, this is what I'm doing in my life, and you have the willpower, I'm just assuming these things, you have the willpower to actually do it, that only gets you so far. How do you deal with what happens when your new obligations, your new commitments, this overload that you've taken on, right? What happens when that actually forces your system to collapse? And it will. It will. So, what pressure actually reveals in your life? Overcommitment forces a finite set of internal trade-offs. And if you've listened to me before, you know I love to talk about trade-offs. Life is a game of trade-offs. So overcommitment forces a finite set of internal trade-offs. So these internal trade-offs, they expose the actual architecture of your behavior. So you're forced to choose what to preserve and what to drop in your life. You are forced to do that. Previously, all of those things were a luxury. Now they are no longer a luxury and they get dropped. You're forced to evaluate where your energy leaks and where it compounds. You're forced to develop systems and time blocks and strategies and methods for dealing with your life, interfacing with your time, all of these things just to accommodate the overload. And this is a good thing. It forces you, having more to do than you actually can do, forces you to level up in every other way, in all of the important ways. Not because you're a visionary, but because the alternative is collapse, and you cannot accept collapse. So, when you do this, you discover what matters. Not because you feel aligned, but because alignment becomes the only path that doesn't default to exhaustion. So, here's where I want to talk, here's where we'll address burnout. So, you might say, Paul, this sounds like a recipe for burnout. Fair, fair. Here's what I'll say. If you have ambitions and you load up your life with things that are truly aligned with your value system that you want to do, bucket list things, lifetime ambition things. I want to own a company. I want this kind of relationship. I want to pursue this. Things in your life that are life level things, macro things, huge things. And you're saying, I'm going to devote my life to the highest quality values and pleasure and things that will bring me happiness than I possibly can. And everything else will have to organize itself around that. Right? So basically what I'm saying is if the things you overload your life with are things that are truly aligned with you, right? If you overcommit yourself to those things, you're not actually, that you might get exhausted, and like I said, you will collapse, but it's not going to be burnout. Because what is burnout? Burnout is when your time is overcommitted to things that are not aligned with you. Burnout is actually, and this is a common misconception, and this is an over-application of burnout. Burnout is not an overexpenditure of your time and energy, time and or energy. Burnout is not a failure to budget your time and energy well. Burnout is an overcommitment to things that do not align with you. Burnout is not a budgeting issue. It's an alignment issue. These things don't matter to me, but I'm spending all my time on them. That's not a time issue. That's an alignment issue. It's a choice issue. It's an allocation issue. It's a free will issue. So when you say, Paul, this sounds like a recipe for burnout. Yeah, if the things you overload your life with are things that are not aligned with you. So this whole strategy assumes a lot of things. It assumes you have the willpower to do this. It assumes you even know what your values are. It assumes that you know how to identify opportunities and goals that align with those personal values. So I've created videos on all these things. They're in my playlists, in my YouTube channel, so you can check those things out. So I'm this is like kind of intermediate level stuff. I wouldn't go to somebody that's like in a really bad place and say like, you just need to be doing more, right? You need to overload your life. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you are in a place of plateau and you feel stuck and you feel restless, like this is not what I want to be doing right now with me. What do I do? What do I do? So you think, well, I have to do less so that I can figure it out. No, you have to do more so that you have to make the trade-offs necessary to realize your happiness and align your choices and your time with your personal values. So by overloading your life, by overcommitting, you discover what matters because alignment becomes the only path that doesn't default to exhaustion. The value here is not pain. We're not just overloading for pain's sake. The value is constraint. You cannot deliberate endlessly about what you want to do, how you want to fill your life, what choices you want to make, what trade-offs you want to make. You have to make real-time decisions that accommodate the actual overload that is making demands on your time, right? So like most times when you face resistance in your life, you will make compromises in the areas of your alignment, and you will say, oh, here are the things that matter to me. I'm going to pay for this thing that doesn't matter because it's a necessity in my life. Out of the budget of things that do matter. And that's the exact opposite thing that we're trying to engineer right now. So you cannot deliberate endlessly when demand exceeds capacity. You must encode these principles and you must identify these leverage points. You must say no to life in ways that maybe you previously weren't saying no to. And those musts show you what your system is really built on. So this concept of intentional overload in your lifestyle design, this is a method. The goal isn't to live unsustainably forever. The point is to provoke architectural friction until the difference between what you're doing and what you're built for become visible, because the pressure of overload is temporary. The system it forces you to have in your life, that's what's permanent. That's what it gives birth to. That's what it creates, is the system. The overload is unsustainable. It will dissipate. But the idea is that you have a curated, designed overcommitment in your life to something that is aligned with you to generate a system that pushes you forward and propels your life into further and further alignment automatically. So that if you're living the same day on repeat, the line is not staying horizontal, it is inclined vertically. But this approach does have its limits. So if you push past those failure signals that you give without reorienting, then the exercise really stops being instructive and it becomes destructive. Because the moment you ignore these breakdowns, that overload really stops being clarifying and it starts being an anesthetic, right? And to avoid that, your overload loop kind of has to include these regular system reviews. What is currently failing? What new constraint is being introduced, right? You have to have priority re-audits. What trade-offs are now visible now that I'm overloaded that weren't before? And you have to have exit thresholds. How will I know when this phase has ended? How do I know when this overload phase needs to end? And what will I retain from this phase? Because the unsustainable phase is not the new baseline. It is a forcing function. You use it to reach a vantage point that wasn't reachable under normal operating conditions. So, the number one obstacle you're going to face when implementing this strategy in your life is others will push back. People in your life, if you have anybody in your life that cares about you, they're going to say this is not sustainable. If you have a therapist, a family member, a friend, they're going to look at you. Even when people ask you, like, what are you doing in your life? And you explain it to them, they're going to go, sounds like too much. Sounds like a lot. Maybe you shouldn't be doing that. So what do you do when other people push back on this method? Because it doesn't sound healthy. And you know what? I think maybe I should say, I'm not advising anybody actually do this. These videos are for me. These videos are for me. But most resistance to this model really comes from people who are optimizing for safety. They assume that energy management is moral realism. And in many contexts, it is. Like, if you're not building what they want, then their critique is misaligned. The question is not whether they would want your pace. The question is whether your current friction is producing more clarity or less. If the discomfort is sharpening your perception of trade-offs, revealing new operating rules, surfacing better design principles in your life, you're learning something. But if you're not, then you're just failing. And the distinction is not how it feels. The distinction is what this overload, this overcommitment generates in your life. This is Parkinson's law. That the time you allocate to a task is the time it's going to take. So if you give yourself 2 days to do something, it's going to take you 2 days. If you give yourself 2 hours to do that same thing, you're going to do it in 2 hours. Maybe the product will look different, but what is the real difference in quality there? If it's a 10% difference in quality, but it saves you 46 hours of time, then you have a Parkinson's law situation where it's actually better to give yourself a threshold or a deadline that is sort of ridiculously short to compel you to completion. And that is what's going to generate efficiency and productivity. And it's going to save you from time waste. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to learn a year or 2 or 10 of lessons in a shorter amount of time so we can maximize the amount of time we're operating at a higher level. Right? So what's our philosophical anchor here? So our philosophical anchor is, we want to look at, you guys know, I'm always a fan of Michel Foucault and his 1984 essay, The Ethics of the Concern for Self as a Practice of Freedom. Foucault reframes self-mastery as a practice of deliberate experimentation. That's what self-mastery is. So people who struggle with imposter syndrome, they're like, I don't feel like I am X. I don't feel like I am Y. Great. But you are running the experiment of being that. and that's all you can do, right? So self mastery and understanding self mastery as deliberate experimentation, not through passivity, not through restraint, but through exercises that impose order on chaos. Not because chaos is bad, but because it contains unstructured possibility. So we're trying to find the balance of tapping into the power of unstructured possibility, that's potential energy, and order, which is goal directed behavior. So you become somebody new, not by discovering a more accurate version of yourself, but by engaging in conditions that require you to become different. This is environment design. This is James Clear, Atomic Habits. The ethics of overload is not moral self-sacrifice. You think, oh, I'm doing so much, I can't be me. No, no, no. You're doing so much to be a you that you want to be. It's ontological authorship. It is a self-authorship of your essence. So, oh, this is who I am. Yeah, maybe, but this is who I want to be. Yeah, definitely. And that transition is possible. And this overload is about enabling and expediting and forcing that transition that actually may never occur. But now you are adding the power of your own agency to force it to occur. The transition between who I am and who I want to be. So this ontological authorship, structuring your time, your choices, your energy investment, and your tolerances, your preferences, what you say yes to, what you say no to, all around who you are becoming rather than who you are. And certainly not around who you've been. That is the goal of overload. So, in conclusion, a sustainable life is repeatable, but a transformational life is not repeatable, full of unrepeatable seasons, at least not at first. And so if you want to change, there's transformation you want to achieve in your life, you will not arrive at it cleanly. You will arrive at it through friction and overload and constraint. You will say yes to too much. You will watch systems fail in your life, and you will build better ones. Not because you felt ready, but because readiness was made irrelevant by what you committed to. So you take on more. You watch what breaks. You use that data to decide what to build next. I hesitate to bring this example because quoting Batman is so cliche, but there's that point, like the theme of the theme of Batman Begins is he's overcoming his fear, and he does overcome his fear. And then in The Dark Knight Rises, he's standing on a cliff and he needs to make the jump, and the doctor in the prison tells him you're not afraid. You need to be afraid to have the compulsion, the energy, the mindset to make this jump. You have to rediscover your fear. Right? So there's this arc where what got you here won't get you there. So you take on more. You watch what breaks. You say, I don't want to be afraid. But what if you must be afraid to get to the next level? Right? What if right now you're so complacent that you are actually not scared enough that you're going to remain who you are forever? And maybe you like who you are. And guess what? Maybe this message is not for you today. Maybe you're in a season of you just got through one of these seasons, and you are kind of like settling into being this new version of you that you've already done a lot of work to achieve. And if that's you, congratulations! Good job. You can move on to the next YouTube video or pass this on to a friend. But this is for people that are maybe at the burgeoning phases of that, thinking, I might not like my life where it is, even though I don't have any deeply presenting or highly inflecting pain points. So you don't confuse breakdown with misalignment. Your life will break. Overcommit to the point that your life breaks. Again, this is advice to me, not to you, obviously, for legal reasons. But you overload your life until it breaks. I've overloaded my life. It does not feel sustainable right now. But guess what? My life, I'm in the middle of putting systems together and just ascending to new heights from an organizational level that's really satisfying. And guess what? It's scary because is it all put together and does it all function great? Not really, not yet. But I'm on that journey, and there are fixtures in my life, and there are ways I interface with my time and energy and people and relationships and opportunities that is different and elevated, and I feel that, and it is very uncomfortable. That's why I'm making this video. But sometimes you need to force your system, your current system, to fail for your priorities to actually become usable and to activate and to elevate your life to a place where your values can actually realize themselves in your life. That is the point of overload. This video is only for a select few people that actually need to hear it. And if that is you today, then I hope you will join me in that endeavor because I feel it's worth it.